Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound. Today we're going to dive into submarines, the history of said submarines. Where do they come from? Who invented them? What are they used for? All that fun stuff. We're going to start back in the 19th century and take it all the way through to the beginning of World War I. That's when submarines sort of hit their stride. But before we do anything else, let's make sure that you like and subscribe. Hit the button. It's important for the development of the channel. Now, let's dive into submarines. The concept of a submarine, a submersible device you can get into and go underneath the waves, goes back 1,000 years. But when you're talking about modern submarines with a military or quasi-military purpose, it all goes back to the same year, 1776. And it goes back to a thing called the Bushnell's turtle. That's Dave Bushnell to you and I. And the turtle, well, that's a 6-foot tall sealed barrel with a tiny conning tower on the top. It's propelled with a little propeller you turn by hand, and it's armed with a 10-foot pole. And on the end of the 10-foot pole, they stuck a mine. The concept is to come out, get underwater, sneak up on your opponent's ship, attach the mine to the bottom of the ship, and scurry away before the mine blows up, killing you too. Now, there's no record of the turtle ever being used in battle, but let's see what the newspapers had to say about it. Here's the Evening Post, New York, August 23rd, 1810. Under inventions and improvements during the American Revolution, it says, early in the war, Mr. David Bushnell of Saybrook invented a machine for submariner navigation, altogether different from any hitherto devised by the art of man. This machine was so constructed so that it could be rowed horizontally at any given depth underwater and could be raised or depressed at pleasure. To this machine, called the American Turtle, was attached a magazine of powder which is intended to be driven into the bottom of the wooden ship, and in driving the spike in at the same time, it would set off the clockwork mechanism, which was the timing device. Then you had half hour or an hour, depending where you set it, to scurry away before the thing blew up. It was never used, as I said, in battle, but there's been many reconstructions of the turtle made. They've all been tested with very, very limited results. It may have got you where you wanted to go, but it was going to take an awful long time. You were probably going to be exhausted, too exhausted to paddle away, and you'd probably go down with the ship. Now, the next foray into submarines is done by a guy you know. Well, you know him not for doing this, but you know him for the steamboats. That's Fulton. Fulton had tried his hand at developing a submarine when he was in the employ during the Napoleonic Wars, in the employ of France. And here's what we have to say in the Bath Journal, February 22, 1802. It says here, I have, says he, just been to inspect the plan and section of a nautilus or diving boat invented by Mr. Fulton, similar to that which he lately made his curious and interesting experiment at Le Havre and Brest. So he's testing these things out in France here. The diving boat, in the construction of which he is now employed, will be capacious enough to contain 8 men and provision enough for 20 days, and will be of sufficient strength and power to enable him to plunge 100 feet underwater if necessary. Imagine you're going into not much more of a barrel. There should be a photograph up of the machine right now. That machine is like a 15-foot long barrel that you're going to take down 100 feet and trust. Well, and remember, the method of propulsion is you. You're the one giving it the propulsion. Good luck with that. It says here, it's a dual purpose boat. It has 2 energy sources. When the boat is above water, it has 2 sails and looks like a common boat. When she is to dive, the masts are struck. So they bring the mast down and down they go. It says with respect to the speed of the boat, it could make, and I love the term, half a league an hour. That's 3 miles an hour. So if you've got enough guys who are aerobically developed, you too can get that boat up to 3 miles per hour. But again, remember, you're going to try to bring it alongside the USS Constitution and attach a mine to the bottom of the boat and escape before it explodes. Someone's going to drop a cannonball on you, or you're not going to get away with the explosion. Now, things go a little dark from 1810 to like 1850, and there's not a lot of action happening in the world with respect to submarines at that point in time. It's probably a byproduct of the peace following the Napoleonic Wars until you get to the Crimean War and then to the American Civil War. Things are pretty peaceful on the European continent, and you generally need a good war to spur innovation. And fortunately, or unfortunately, we get a good war in 1861. You get the Civil War. And now you got a German-American engineer named Julius Kroll, who develops a submarine. And what it's fascinating and famous for is that it has a pressurized work chamber which allows the crew to exit or enter the machine while it's underwater. You can go in underneath. It's kind of like a modern locked out diving chamber or something you'd have on a submersible now. He developed that back in 1861. He felt the essential point of his Submariner Explorer, and that's what he called it, great name, a Submariner Explorer, was the fact that, well, he found a way that he just said that he could scrub the air. He could take the bad air, as they called it at the time, scrub it with chemicals, and then restore the oxygen levels and return it into the passenger compartment, and in effect keep the thing going for days. I'm not sure that worked all that well, but the rest of it did. And as far as human-powered apparatus go, it was a pretty effective vessel. Now, speaking of effective vessels, well, this is one that is the most effective and least effective vessel on our list. It's the Hunley. Now remember that's the Confederate submarine Hunley, named after its inventor Hunley, but not named after him initially. Named after him, you'll see here, he dies in it, as does everybody else. So here we go. The Hunley is about a 40-foot long submarine, human-powered, crew of 8. They launched the thing, and it sinks on August 29th, 1863. During a test run, killing 5 of the 8 members. 3 are able to scramble out, but the other 5 drown. And then we have an article in the Charleston Mercury noting that. It says here, we received from Captain Chisholm his check for $250 for the benefit of the families of the 5 men who lost their lives in the submarine boat with Captain Hunley. So Hunley's still alive, but 5 are dead, and not wanting to leave bad enough alone, they raise the boat, and they get 8 nuts crazy enough to go back in it, and they go in it. One of the nuts is Hunley the inventor. And of course, on October 15th, 1863, it sinks again, killing all of its second crew of 8, including Hunley. So what do? They raise it again. And what do? They get 8 guys crazy enough to go into the thing. They do it, and this time it works. They attack the Union sloop Housatonic. It's a pretty large vessel with 300 people on board, and they sink it. But the charge goes off while they're still next to the boat, and they sink too. So they took the Housatonic down, but along with themselves. So all 3 crews die in this tragic Hunley. The Hunley, of course, has been resurrected. They found it, they brought it up, and it's been partially restored or totally restored. Here's in the Troy Messenger. They have the summary of the Housatonic. I keep mispronouncing that. The United States sloop of war Housatonic, one of the blockading squadron off Charleston Harbor, carried 13 guns and a crew of 300, was destroyed by a torpedo on the night of the 17th February 1864. The torpedo was used on this occasion by the submarine boat H.L. Hunley of Mobile and commanded by Lieutenant General Dixon of this city. Now, they're using the term torpedo, and up until 1872, and we're going to see that, a torpedo merely meant a mine. Remember the famous Admiral Farragut line, damn it, full speed ahead? Well, there aren't guys shooting torpedoes. It's a floating mine, is a torpedo. Advancements continue apace, though, around the world. Here's an article in the Detroit Free Press of July 30th, 1862, talking about a Spanish submarine based in Havana, Cuba, of all places. It says here, no more drowning cases. A scientific person by the name of Monturio, living near Madrid, has, it appears, overcome the great natural obstacle of human respiration below the surface of water. I'm not sure he's exactly done that. He's just invented a type of submarine. It says here, the secret of his invention is the submarine boat or ship, which he names the Ictanio, which is the fish boat. It says the navigator of the machine and the crew can subsist for any length of time desirable below the surface, and the generation of atmospheric air goes on as fast as required for use. Does it? You'll be surprised. It might just. Here's a headline in the Times-Picayune, New Orleans, April 23rd, 1863. It says here, Spain boasts itself now of the invention of a submarine navigator to which the name Ictinio or fish ship is given. A meeting of men of science and high social standing has been held in Havana for the purpose of raising by subscription the necessary means for fully developing its usefulness. Havana, Cuba as a center of scientific research. Can you imagine? It says here, its success is assured by men standing at the head of naval affairs and in science. And you know what? The fellow actually did invent something real. What he did, What he successfully developed was a chemically powered anaerobic independent steam engine. The engine was powered by a mixture of potassium chlorate and zinc, which reacted to generate heat and oxygen. You could generate your own oxygen through the combustion of those two materials. And so that process is still used in many submarines to today. And it all happened in Havana, Cuba. They can't even make cigars there anymore. But you needed something a little more. You can't be going around in submarines pedaling them with your feet. Unless you're Fred Flintstone, it just doesn't work like that. You got to come up with a mechanical means of propulsion. And I hate to admit it, and we're going to keep it very short, because it's the French who came up with the first motorized submarine. It's a device in 1863 called the plunger. And what they did, they used compressed air from 23 tanks that were up at 180 psi. I'm surprised the tanks didn't blow up, but they didn't. And so they used the tanks to do a little reciprocating engine, and the thing would actually go. But they didn't know how to steer it. They couldn't judge the depths. It was a death trap, but it went fast. But now we're in a situation here. We've got underwater vehicles that go fast. Well, you can't be just wanting to attach mines to the bottom of ships like a wad of gum. That requires you to get right in next to the thing. That's impossible. If not impossible, you're going to die. We need a device where at a distance you can bring to bear forces sufficient to sink a ship. That sounds like a modern torpedo. And so when does that happen? Well, right about when it needs to, in 1872. Because remember, you ain't nobody unless you got a fully functioning torpedo here. It says here, the trial of the Whitehead fish torpedo, and Whitehead's the inventor, and fish torpedo is what they called it. Makes sense. A torpedo's a mine and a fish goes through the water, so it's a fish torpedo, has resulted in a demonstration that it possesses destructive powers greater even than those claimed for by the inventor. That's a rare occurrence when it outperforms expectations, but I guess that's if you want to get the contract, that's what you do. He goes, the latter has received the promised reward of £15,000. £15,000 for coming up with that torpedo. That's the equivalent of over $2.5 million today for having a good idea. He goes, this truly infernal invention. Oh, they're afraid. The press is understandably afraid of the implications of what this means to naval warfare. It says here, this truly infernal invention is to be utilized forthwith by the government, and the Admiralty are about to build a warship, the armament of which will consist of torpedo artillery carried below the waterline. So that's what they're calling it. A torpedo tube is torpedo artillery, which I guess makes sense in the context of what artillery does, shoots a projectile. But then they lament, what if the wooden walls of old England have only given way to the formidable ironclads and rams of the present, in order that the latter may in their turn be supplanted by a naval monster whose powers of destruction are all the more terrible because they are invisible. It is kind of frightening. You can't see what's about to attack you, and you could be in a 700-foot-long, 30,000-ton battleship. One boom, and down you go. Well, here's another explanation of what they were now referring as submarine artillery in the Belfast Evening Telegraph of January 9th, 1872. It says here, the Times states that when next year's naval estimates are brought forward, it is very probable they will be found to contain provisions for the construction of a vessel, the armament of which will consist of torpedo artillery carried below the waterline. So that's the new frightening thing. You won't even see where they're coming from because they're below the waterline here. It says, if it should be found in practical work that a ship can thus carry her battery of torpedo guns at any required distance below her waterline, the nation will be committed to another reconstruction of the Navy. So we're going to have to rebuild all our ships. Darn, what's that going to cost? You're going to have to do the whole thing over in order to make way for this new and very frightening weapon. So now the way's open for the development of a really good submarine. And the first attempt is going to be made by a fellow named Garrett. Here we have the Liverpool Daily Post, Wednesday, November 26, 1879. It says here, new Garrett submarine torpedo boat, an extraordinary invention. It says here, it will be in the recollection of the public that a novel submarine boat was experimented with in the Great Float at Birkenhead early in August 1878 when the inventor, the Reverend G.W. Garrett, and it's amazing how many reverends got involved in inventions and science in the 19th and 18th century. It says here, it's a device, he remained underwater for some hours and tested the efficiency of his invention for purifying the human breath so as to allow the life of being sustained in a small shut-up space for long periods of time, and also the correctness of his calculations for floating the vessel at such depths in the water as he might desire. So we got a vessel now that you can stay in, and you can make it go up and down as you want. It says here, the new vessel is over 30 tons displacement, is fitted with an engine of novel construction, the motor power by which it is driven being a secret. Sounds like the Wright brothers. Let's keep it all a secret. Well, hopefully they'll give us the contract. It says here, the boat carries a crew of 3, the inventor himself undertaking to navigate her. And it's noted that she's 40 feet long with a conning tower rising from the center. Now, right off the get-go, they're calling it a conning tower. Now, that must have an application somewhere else that I wasn't able to find. It may be a mining term or something, but it's the conning tower. Reconnoitering, perhaps? Anyway, it's got a conning tower, and she's fitted with horizontal and vertical rudders and would carry torpedoes at both sides to be ejected by means of air springs. Sounds like the prelude to a modern device. Step, though, onto the world stage is the noted Swedish industrialist, and I guess he was noted at the time, Thorsten Nordenfeldt. Great name, eh? Here we have an article in the Hampshire Telegraph and Naval Chronicle of February 13th, 1886. It says here, well, you know what? I'll give away the secret. He develops the first real powered boat with submersible properties. It's a real ship, a real boat that you can really travel in. It says, Mr. Thorsten Nordenfeldt delivered an interesting lecture on the 5th instant at the Royal United Institution on submarine boats. They've already got an institution on submarine boats. They haven't got a submarine yet, but we got an institution. He told his boat that his audience that his boat can go 150 miles and upward previous to the attack without recoaling. Now this is funny. We're getting in the second. You have coal-fired submarines like old railroad engines. Imagine the dirt. It's begging for a new method of propulsion. We'll get to that in a second. It says here he gives the following dimensions: it's 64 feet long, 9 feet wide, displaces 60 tons, can travel at 9 knots. That's 10 miles an hour. Can submerge to 50 feet, has one fish torpedo 14 feet long. It's carried outside on the bow and is discharged mechanically. The sinking apparatus consists of 2 vertical propellers driven by a 6-horsepower double-cylinder engine. But that's a double-cylinder steam engine powered by coal. These propellers are placed in sponsons on each side of the boat. A tank contains 4 tons of water for regulating the buoyancy, and the crew consists of 3 men. Then he talks about tactics. How are you going to do this? When the boat approaches the enemy sufficiently near to be in danger of discovery, she descends so that the cupola alone appears above the water. This is done by taking sufficient water into the tanks to reduce buoyancy of the vessel. So his method is to bring water in or to let water out in order to regulate the depth of your machine. He also noted, with the coal in the bunkers, this boat can keep to sea for 5 days or more, and thus would be especially suitable for cruising. Like, is he talking about going on a Baltic cruise or something, or a Mediterranean cruise? In any event, you've got a coal bunker on this little cramped submarine here. He goes, he intended to arm his boat with either a 21-pound quick-firing shell gun. That's a big gun. You go back, I think a Sherman tank was like a 17-pounder in World War II. So this is a big gun, a 21-pounder. And he also and a smaller gun, 1 or 2 smaller guns as well. And there was a comment from the gallery. And the gallery, though, because of the nature of this meeting, included His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, who doubted whether the submarine would be able to escape after firing the torpedo with sufficient speed to get clear of danger from the explosion of so large a charge as 300 pounds of dynamite. And he was planning on having 300 pounds of dynamite in his torpedo, which would make it every bit as, well, almost as powerful as a good World War I torpedo. Then we deal with a pair of Campbell and Ash, a couple of Englishman inventors here. Actually, Scotsmen, aren't they? Yes, Campbell's. And anyways, we have a copy of the Liverpool Mercury here of Monday, December 27th, 1886. Headline: a submarine torpedo boat. It says, ever since the invention of torpedoes, there has been a demand for a submarine war vessel. A vessel, that is to say, which should be capable of remaining or progressing beneath the surface of the sea and of being raised or lowered at the will of the officer in command. It was noted that, with respect to the boat they developed, that it then occurred to Mr. Campbell that fish rise and sink without raising their fins or any means of propulsion. They do so by muscular contraction or expansion. The question arose as to whether it was possible to give a similar power of contraction or expansion to a boat. The problem was solved by placing in the sides of the hull a series of metal cylinders into which were fitted especially constructed rams or drums, which could be protruded or withdrawn by a simple mechanical process. So you either shove more water in, or you withdraw more water out, replacing with air. When it has lots of air, it goes up. When it has mostly water, it goes down. These are the little things that must be solved so that everyone on board doesn't die. They noticed, well, of course, without any irony, they named their boat the Nautilus, like everyone else has named their boats the Nautilus so far. It says the actual boat, which is wholly submerged, is cigar-shaped, 60 feet long by 8 feet in diameter. Entrance to it is by means of a small manhole. Goes down through the top. It says here, fore and aft along the center are 4 large wheels by means of which the drums, or projectors as they are called, are protruded and withdrawn. So these are like, think in terms like coffee cans that are moving along one into the other. There's but little natural light, but the interior is well illuminated by electricity. So they got fully electric lights on this thing. It's 1886. Edison's only perfected his light bulb like 8 years before, but this thing's lit up like a Christmas tree. It is noted that the ship is intended to carry a large store of compressed air and to purify that which is fouled by means of caustic potash or other chemicals. Everyone's looking for an appropriate method to scrub the bad air. It's noted that the boat is close and hot, but not unbearably so, and as things stand, it is quite possible for the crew to remain underwater for half an hour. Well, they're going to have to do a lot better than that if they're going to get a government contract for a submarine. Again, the very important milestone, and we're not going to spend that much time on it because it was done by the French, but we have to give them their due. It's the first practical electrically powered submarine, and that is we're halfway there. You got to get rid of the coal. You got to get rid of the coal and replace it with petrol, preferably diesel, so you get that nice diesel electric thing. But electric is the first clean way of running a submarine here. And it says here, most satisfactory results have attended the official trials of the Ginmote, and I'm pronouncing that in English, so I don't have to do any more French than I need to. The Ginmote submarine at Toulon. A complete immersion lasted 45 minutes. Then they went back and had another, and they stayed under the water for 2 hours without inconvenience to their free respiration. The Ginmote was subsequently maneuvered at top speed in the anchorage grounds and made to plunge and rise at intervals with the utmost facility and expedition. So it works. It goes up, it goes down, it does what you want. You stay alive and you're not next to a coal boiler. Although no practical experiments were attempted in attaching live torpedoes to a hull below water, the feasibility of the operation appeared to be fully accepted as the Ginmote was reported to be ready for sea. They're still talking. It's funny. They're still talking about attaching mines to ships, whereas the English are already off with their speedy torpedoes. So there's a little. I guess there's a little catching up to do by the French, but now with the electric engine, there's a little catching up to do by the English as well. Which leads us. Well, if there's going to be a guy who really puts it all together here, I'm going to nominate John Philip Holland. He's an Irish. I think he's an Irishman. That's what it said in the notes. He thinks he's an Irishman who he develops a really practicable, great working submarine, which is adopted by the English and subsequently is adopted by the Americans as well. Now, here we have the discussions here in the United States about what submarine to adopt. It's in the Times-Herald, Washington, D.C., May 22, 1902. Committee discusses Holland torpedo boat. Ensign Nelson testifies to the value of the submarine craft. Cites experience of English Navy. It says here in the hearing yesterday before the House Committee on Naval Affairs, which is now considering the advisability of appropriating more money for submarine boats, it was brought out that England had profited by the United States' development of such engines of war in equipping her Navy to a greater degree with vessels of this type than any other country. There is a race on. England is going to have the most initially. France is going to follow close behind. America is going to have. And then late in the game is going to be Germany, but they're going to catch up pretty quick. The Holland, there's no doubt, there's no question that the Holland submarine is a quality vessel. But I found this article in the Cedar Rapids Gazette, February 13th, 1901. Well, it just shows you that politics remains politics. This is an article in opposition to the adoption by Congress of the Holland ship for America. Here what it says here. A big scheme is worked by lobby. Another batch of submarine boats worked off on government despite expert condemnation. And that's what's interesting about throughout this story. They're condemning the Holland boat, and they're condemning the procurement process, but they do not cite any names and they do not cite any evidence whatsoever to support their position. It really just looks like a hit piece. Well, let's see what we have here. It says here each submarine is going to cost $170,000. It's noted that The Holland submarine boat has thus far proved a failure in that the highly colored reports of its successful trial at Newport last fall were inspired by persons commercially interested in the boat. But this article is obviously sponsored by persons commercially interested in another boat, because they go on to say, although the Holland type is not without merit, okay, you can't rip it, the British are using the thing, it is asserted that a lobby has been at work here for over 10 years for the sole purpose of shouldering the Holland boat upon the government. Imagine that. Lobbyists in Washington, D.C. I am appalled and shocked. It says their purpose of the lobbying is to shoulder the Holland boat upon the government and draw handsome royalties. It says here, while the government pays $170,000 for each of the 7 Holland submarines, now in course of construction, naval officers who know best say place the value at $70,000 and some as little as $50,000. They're pulling numbers out of the air. They don't, like I said, they don't cite any studies. They don't cite any humans. They don't have any quotes. They're just saying, first, it's bad, and the second, it's too much, and it's got to be somebody else. And then finally, as a final kick as they go out the door, they say, Holland Submarines Boat Company operates no shipyards of its own, has no assets, and sublets its contracts for the construction of boats to Lewis Nixon of Elizabeth, New Jersey, a former assistant, can't be anything, a former guy works for the government, a former assistant in the Naval Bureau of Construction and Repair, and to the United Iron Workers of San Francisco. Okay, so blame it on the unions. Blame it on this guy who's a government. Again, I'm shocked. A guy who worked in military procurement, after he gets out of his position in government, goes to work for a military supplier. I'm shocked. It's never happened before. But the British have no such qualms about adopting the Holland boat or any other boat of that matter. Here's an article in the Sunday People, Sunday, May 12th, 1912. Headline, Our Sailor King, a memorable visit to the fleet, dive in a submarine. 1912, and the King's going down in a submarine. It says, yesterday the King concluded a memorable visit to his fleet, a visit which, in spite of the dense fog overhanging the channel during the early part of the week, was attended with great success. It's noted that another outstanding event was the King's trip on the submarine D4. D4 is their most modern class of submarines. With His Majesty aboard, the craft went into a deep water and dived, remaining beneath the surface for 10 minutes. I'm not sure I would have got on a submarine in 1912 and went down underwater for 10 minutes. Good for the King. But who else besides the King goes on submarines? Well, lots of guys. It looks like the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, and the Lord of the Admiralty. It says here, Mr. Balfour in a submarine, Birmingham Gazette, May 9th, 1912. Meanwhile, Mr. Asquith, Mr. Churchill, and Mr. Balfour had filled in the time with a visit to one of the new D-class submarines, which is being fitted with a disappearing gun. The Prime Minister inspected the whole of the apparatus via the submarine with characteristic thoroughness. The First Lord of the Admiralty, that would be Churchill, and the ex-Prime Minister, that would be Asquith, were even more thorough, for they stayed in the submarine while she went for a trip beneath the waves. That is a very Churchillian thing to do. Churchillian was always the first with everything, the first with tanks, flew on planes. Now he's one of the first guys going beneath the waves in a submarine. But remember, we've got a war about to happen here. And remember in our Great White Fleet episode where Teddy Roosevelt sent the fleet around the world to show the strength of the United States, there's a military arms race on. The arms race was specifically with respect to dreadnought battleships. But also there was an arms race with respect to submarines. Basically the flip side of dreadnoughts, the thing that can take down a dreadnought. Here's an article in the Arizona Daily Star, and you wouldn't expect the Arizona Daily Star to have a thorough analysis of the German submarine situation, but they do. Here we go. Seawas of the Kaiser. Germany's ambitious declaration of a submarine blockade of England has directed attention anew to that style of warship. The successful outcome of Germany's plan would prove a revolution in naval warfare, as far-reaching as the defeat of the Merrimack by the Monitor. I thought the Merrimack fought the Monitor to a draw. Am I wrong about that? Well, anyways, it's noted here that no one knows exactly how many submarines the German strength is at present. In August, the United States Naval Institution estimated it was 28 to 30 boats, with 9 in the stocks, 9 being built. Nobody knows exactly what they are. They make a comment in the article that they didn't have any submarines whatsoever until 1906 when they put in their first one. It was a small little ship about only 128 feet in length. They noticed that German submarines are numbered in order the date of their launching. That's why they go in order. Like it starts with the U-1 literally and ends up like a U-571 at the end of World War II. It says the U means Unterseeboot, under the sea boat. Hard to believe. Notes that even the first ones, the first submarines that they had a top speed on the surface of 17 miles per hour and a submerged speed of 10 miles per hour, which seems a little fast even by World War II standards. The next round of ships that come in are in 1911, 1912. They're the U-12 through U-18. They're big 800-ton Bahamas. And they're the first ones that are designed for attack purposes. They come with 4 torpedo tubes. And that's kind of what you're used to if in World War II submarines. Most of them will have four torpedo tubes. 1913, they ordered, the race is on, they ordered 9 more boats, U-19 through 27. These are big 900-tonners. They're 214 feet long, and they have a cruising range of 2,500 miles, which means they can cruise effectively all around the British Isles or get most of the way across the Atlantic without refueling. Now, I don't know exactly how you refuel in the Atlantic unless you brought a coal ship along with you, but I'm not the guy in charge of logistics in World War I. But that's what the newspaper says. It says they're going to have a new super dreadnought class of battleship. That's going that super dreadnought class of submarine, which are going to be 1,000 feet long and have 14-pound guns and et cetera, et cetera. None of it ever happened. It was all baloney. It's a little bit of that's just a little bit of scare tactics and fear mongering to sell newspapers and keep the public in support of the war. But did they work? Do submarines work, or did they work back then in 1914 to 1918? And the answer is, heck, they did. Here's the headline in the Pantograph, Bloomington, Illinois, September 23rd, 1914. The war's only been going on for a month. 3 British cruisers sunk. Abacour, Hogue, and Cressy are sent to the bottom of the North Sea. Were torpedoed by German submarines, according to official announcement. And it was noted, well, this is kind of tragic. The Abacour was torpedoed first. The Hague and the Cressy drew up close to her and were standing by in order to save survivors when both of them got plugged by torpedoes. And what the crazy thing was, it was all 3 shots were by one submarine. The U-9. This was an early primitive boat with three shots, 3 500-foot vessels to the bottom of the sea, 3 cruisers, just one step down below battleships. These are things that have like 8 or 6-inch guns. These are big ships. These were older ones, but it doesn't matter. They're down in 3 shots in the space of an hour. That's what a submarine can do. What else can a submarine do? Well, it can be a terror weapon. Here we have the Oshkosh Northwestern of Oshkosh. Say that 10 times. Oshkosh, Wisconsin. May 7th, 1915. Steamer sunk by German torpedo. Palatial liner sent to the bottom off Irish coast. Doubt about passengers. Well, there's no doubt about 1,200 of them died. Well, it was episodes like this, along with the unrestricted warfare, submarine warfare that the Germans brought in 1917 that would bring America into the war. By 1917, we got working, functioning submarine services in all the major navies. But Germany takes it. They always do, don't they? They take it that little extra step that really is annoying. With their unrestricted submarine warfare, they're focusing on Americans, and they think what they can do. They think combination thing. They can starve. They don't. They're going to bring America into the war. That's okay. They're going to starve out Britain, and they're going to be able to beat the Allied forces on the ground in Europe before the United States can get a substantial number of men on the continent. And they guessed wrong. It didn't work out that way. One of the reasons they didn't was the introduction of the convoy system that came in June of 1917. See, with weapons, there's always measures and countermeasures. We've got submarines and torpedoes. We'll do a convoy. And you might think convoy, that's kind of lame. Just bundle everybody together, but you surround it with several fast warships. And even with the primitive technology of the day, it's very effective. The Germans, as a matter of fact, had calculated they would have to sink at least 600,000 tons of shipping a month in order to starve out Britain. And by using the convoy system, they cut that in half down to 300,000 tons. And what's most important for Americans is that there was not the loss of a single troop ship. As a matter of fact, there were no losses of any major troop ships in World War I or World War II. Check the mail. A lot of Japanese ships went down, a lot of German ships went down, but no American ships went down during the course of the war. Now the war ends. We're in the interwar years. The submarines is basically a mature weapon. From World War I to World War II, it remains substantially the same. There'll be innovations, but that'll be in the spy versus spy stuff, the measure countermeasure stuff. You get the development of sonar, depth charges are improved, but they morph into a great thing called the Hedgehog, which is basically a killing machine for submarines. And then other technical advancements like the auditory seeking torpedoes and stuff. Really good stuff. But that's a story for another day. As is the Cold War. We're just trying to bring submarines up to the present. The Cold War, you get nuclear submarines, nuclear-powered submarines can stay down forever with the only limiting factor being how much food they can bring aboard. You get those same nuclear submarines turned into nuclear missile platforms, basically what a submarine has become today. And what we're left with is sort of like the submarine Armageddon, just floating around in the ether. But that's a good place to stop. We've gone all the way from the turtle through to nuclear weapons. We've looked at every phase of development of the submarine, and the submarine remains one of the three pillars of the triad of our nuclear deterrence. It's a scary thought, isn't it? Well, why not have a drink? And like everything else in this episode, we're going to have a Nautilus because we've already had like half a dozen Nautilus. And Nautilus it's a great drink. It's 2 ounces of tequila, 2 ounces of cranberry juice, 1 ounce of freshly squeezed, always freshly squeezed lime juice, and they say a half an ounce of simple syrup. Try cutting that in half. There's enough sweetness there with the cranberry juice. Go to a quarter ounce of simple syrup. You chill a highball glass, then fill it with ice, then shake your ingredients for 20-25 seconds till you get the right dilution and the right temperature, then strain that into that highball glass, garnish with a twist of lime, drink it with a straw, and enjoy a Nautilus. And we're done. Remember to like and subscribe. Subscriptions are extremely important for the development of the channel. And we'll see you again next week, maybe even sooner, with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Take care, everybody.